Okay, so it seems like we're probably not going to have a lot of people in this stream. We don't have a lot of people registered in general, so it's more like a one-on-one kind of talk instead of an actual stream. But that's okay. I'm going to start already because my intro is pretty much all about me, and if people join late, they're not going to lose any valuable information. So before I even get into anything about myself and who I am, if you don't already follow Fiveable on Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube, definitely do immediately. They have a lot of great resources. The YouTube channel has AP reviews later in the year, right before actual AP exams in May. And then the Twitter and Insta do have AP memes with certain subjects. So I definitely check that out. It's just fun. And it's a really great resource. And because you're watching Fiveable streams, I think it'd be really great if you could watch these streams. And then also support what you learned by looking at our Twitter and our Instagram. And so in this stream, our first slide is going to be all about me, just a quick little introduction, who I am, why I'm here, that kind of stuff. And then we're actually going to go into the empires. So our first empire would be Great Zimbabwe, and then Ethiopia, then the Hausa kingdoms. And if you did the poll, you'll see that my poll mentioned the Swahili city-states. And you'll be asking, why don't the Swahili city-states have their own slide? And I did a stream last week on continuities, change and continuities over time in Africa. And in that stream, I spent, I would say, around like 50% of it on the Swahili city-states. I chose not to dedicate a whole slide to the Swahili city-states again, but I'll definitely be reviewing all the information that I taught in that stream this week. So even if you weren't there for last week's stream, I'll definitely be going over that same information, but I'll be using it to compare the Swahili city-states to Great Zimbabwe. So don't worry, I didn't forget about the Swahili city-states. And then after that, I wrote 2 review questions, not AP style questions. They aren't LEQs or DBQs or SAQs, like anything like that, but they're more like a critical thinking, change and continuities over time, and then evaluate the importance of type of questions. Just questions to get you thinking and help you review what you're learning in this stream. So hi, it's an all about me slide. My name's Charlie. I'm from New Jersey. I'm from northern New Jersey, right about 20-ish minutes from New York City. I'm a sophomore in high school. I just started my sophomore year 2 weeks ago. And because I'm a sophomore now, I took AP World History as a freshman. In my school, it's a freshman history course, and it was a very large freshman history course. We had about 30, 35 people taking the AP World History exam by the end of the year. And I got a 5 on the test, which sounds honestly kind of crazy. It makes me sound like I have a PhD in history, but in reality, I don't. And I think AP World History is mainly about effective studying, but it's not a class that's all based on exact memorization. Like, you don't have to memorize everything that you see in your Barron's book, everything that you see in your Princeton review. It's more about knowing your information and being able to apply that to certain situations. Being able to be like, yeah, I know about African kingdoms, and I can apply that to my knowledge about other African kingdoms or trade routes. And those are 2 things that we'll be going over today. We'll be going over the significance of the sand roads or the Trans-Saharan roads and the Indian Ocean trade in African history at this time. And that's something I went over last week too, but I'll be reviewing it this week, just because these 2 lessons are both about Africa. They're both about changes. They're both about things that are happening at this time. And we're focusing on different kingdoms in both of these sections. My first section was mainly on the Swahili city-states, and then this one's gonna go into some previous empires, but we'll also go into a little bit about Songhai, we'll go into Mali, we'll go into a lot of other kingdoms, more landlocked kingdoms. And that's my focus this week, is to go over landlocked Central African, Southern African, but don't share a border with the ocean. Because last week I focused a lot on ocean trade, and this week we're going to be focusing on how did empires that were completely surrounded by land, completely surrounded by mountains, how were they able to expand? And that's something we'll be going over today. Also, in the bottom toolbar, there's an Ask a Question button. You can press it at any time, ask a question, type in your question, I'll see it and I'll answer it. If that's too much of a hassle, if you just think that's like an odd spot, you can go into the chat and you can type your question straight there and I can answer from there too. So you have two options. I'm going to go on to the next slide. So Great Zimbabwe. Great Zimbabwe was in Zimbabwe, as you can probably assume. Zimbabwe on this map is highlighted in red. It's not the most strong color of red. You can't really tell unless you have like amazing eyesight. So you have to look very closely. It's in southern Africa. And as you can see, it's completely landlocked. So this falls into our what we're going over today, just landlocked African kingdoms. So Zimbabwe is a very interesting country. So the northern part of Africa is mainly desert, and then the middle of Africa is mainly forest, and then it goes back to desert at the bottom. It's like a sandwich with desert, and then forest, and then more desert at the bottom. But Zimbabwe is interesting because it's right on the border of the desert and the greenery part. So Zimbabwe has a large variety of different biomes. So Zimbabwe does not touch any water, it does not touch any oceans. Zimbabwe is completely landlocked, but it has a major water source called the Zambezi. And the Zambezi is a river. It's the fourth longest river in Africa, and it flows through the northern part of the country. So that's how Great Zimbabwe got a lot of its water, got a lot of its protein, like fish. It was an amazing source of water. And just something, if you don't know already, it's something I'll just go over briefly. Water is very important. Countries and kingdoms planned where they were going to build their empires, where they were going to build their cities based on water. If water was close, if there was proximity to water, that was great because people wouldn't die of dehydration. People would have ways to get protein like fish, seafood. So people want to start places by water. So this is why they started it on the Zambezi River. Fourth longest river in Africa. It goes through Central Africa, and then it goes through Southern Africa as well, and it empties out into the Indian Ocean, I believe. The northern part of Zimbabwe is like most of the central part of Africa. There's a lot of mountains. There's a lot of greenery. It's unlike other parts of, neighbors like Botswana, Namibia, South Africa. Regions of Zimbabwe by that borders of South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, like you can see here, they're more arid. They have savanna grasslands, they have more desert-like areas, whereas the northern part of Zimbabwe along the border with Zambia and Mozambique is a little bit more grassy. There's a savanna grasslands as well, but there's more mountains. And we'll see that when I show you the picture of Great Zimbabwe afterwards. Great Zimbabwe is literally in the middle of the mountains. So you'll see why people would want to build their empire in the mountains. So I'm gonna go and show you a picture right now. So this is Great Zimbabwe. It doesn't look like much here, but you can see right around here, you see almost like a stack of rocks. That is Great Zimbabwe. One of the cool things about Great Zimbabwe and how it was constructed was that Great Zimbabwe was a completely walled city. And in AP World History, I don't remember learning a lot about walled cities. I remember St. Malo, but you don't really go over St. Malo until World War II before it gets bombed. So just seeing a walled empire is really interesting. And what's more interesting is that it's in the middle of the mountains. So why would someone want to build an empire in the mountains? I want you to answer this question in the chat. So the question basically is, what are some benefits of building an empire in the mountains, high up in the mountains, and not exactly by rivers? It doesn't need to be by rivers. Why would you want, if I were the person creating Great Zimbabwe, why would I want to build Great Zimbabwe in the mountains? It's a question you can answer in the chat. I'll give you like 2 minutes to answer it. Take your time. Okay, so Melissa seems to have the answer, defense. It's really hard for people to take your territory if you're surrounded by mountains. And Great Zimbabwe made it even harder for you to invade because they completely surrounded their city with a humongous wall. And the construction of Great Zimbabwe began around the 11th century. So it's really early for such like an architecturally advanced city. Like at this time, you imagine empires being kind of like not the most well-built, not very advanced or structural. But the people of Great Zimbabwe were able to build walls, very tall walls to block invaders, and do it in the middle of the mountains. These walls are actually really tall. Like these walls at their tallest point are 36 feet. 36 feet, you cannot get a rope over that. You cannot jump over that. You can attempt to climb over it, but if they're 36-foot long rocks, it's going to be really hard for you to climb over there. So next thing I want to go over. Great Zimbabwe, it's very expansive. It's a very big empire. It covers a lot of territory. The ruins span over 1,800 acres. So if you live in an urban area like me, you probably don't know how big acres are. So 1,800 acres is about 1,364 football fields. So if you can imagine one football field, multiply that by 1,400, and then there you have the entire size of Great Zimbabwe. Great Zimbabwe was massive. And it was completely surrounded by stones. You can't even imagine how people got that there. You don't know how much time they spent trying to build this whole city by carrying thousands and thousands of pounds of rocks. Great Zimbabwe, because it was so big, it also had a decently big population. Not as big as empires we see like Rome, but it had anywhere from 10,000 to 16,000 people. Importance of trade. So last week, as I said before, I spent a lot of time on Indian Ocean trade. Great Zimbabwe was not very close to the Indian Ocean. I got rid of my map from before. It's completely landlocked, as I've said many times before, but it's not very close to the ocean. You'd have to cross what is nowadays modern Mozambique. But Great Zimbabwe was also involved in Indian Ocean trade. They interacted with people in the Swahili city-states, people in Mogadishu, people in Mombasa, which are two major cities in Swahili city-states. They interacted with them to get Chinese goods and to get Indian goods, because the Indian Ocean trade spanned all of the Indian Ocean. It spanned China. It reached India. It reached Kenya, Yemen, modern-day Somalia. It was really expansive. So even though they were landlocked and they were completely surrounded by these mountains, they were able to get over them to interact with people in other regions to trade with them, which I think was really interesting because cities, especially walled cities, cities in between mountains, tend to be very isolated. And Great Zimbabwe was anything but. They were so protected, but they weren't isolated. I believe I have another picture here, just another picture. Still an aerial view of Great Zimbabwe. It's from a little bit of a closer angle if you want to see how tall, how even and uniform that barrier actually is. So like all empires, Great Zimbabwe had to fall. It wasn't a very rapid fall. Like it wasn't like one day it was Great Zimbabwe and the next day it wasn't. The reason why Great Zimbabwe fell is actually unknown to this day. We don't know whether they just evacuated the area, they just left and the people went to other regions. We don't know if it was because trade declined. We don't know if it's because of lack of agriculture, because of global warming. It's really just unknown to this point. So there's a lot of options that we can consider, but we don't exactly know why Great Zimbabwe fell like we do with other empires. So next is Ethiopia, and I'll be going into some geography again. Just I feel like geography helps you understand a lot more of the history. If you know where this place has if this place has a lot of rain, if this place has a lot of desert, it's going to tell you a lot about how the people live, how the people have to interact with each other because of these large stretches of desert. And we went over that last week when we did the Trans-Saharan / sand roads. And we talked a little bit about Western African civilizations, which we'll go into after we go over Ethiopia. So Ethiopia is also kind of like Zimbabwe. On the western section of Ethiopia, it borders South Sudan, parts of Sudan that are known for having a little more greenery. And then the eastern part of Ethiopia is desert. Ethiopia does not have any coastline, but it's pretty close to the water. It's much closer to the water than Zimbabwe ever was. You literally have to pass through one tiny little country right over here. Wasn't a country at that point, but you literally just have to cross this little country or this little tail. This country is called Eritrea. You'd cross this little tail of Eritrea and you'd have water at the Gulf of Aden and you would have water at the Red Sea. Those were also very busy in Indian Ocean trade. So the Ethiopian Empire is not an empire that they go into a lot of depth about. When we talk about Ethiopian history and AP World History, we mainly go over Aksum. So I wanted to go over a little bit about Aksum. So Aksum is kind of unique for empires at this time. So Africa, many people at this time followed a form of like animism or shamanism. So shamanism, when we think of shamanism, we think of rituals, we think of magical potions. And even though that is a bit, falsified, it is true. It's a religion where we have medicine doctors, we have a lot of traditional ways, and animism is a religion where people see that every inanimate object, something like a rock or a tree, has a spirit and a soul. So I see this rock, and this rock has emotions too. It has a soul. It's not something that we can treat with little to no respect. We have to respect this rock. This rock's on our earth. I'm not going to crush this rock because it is one with us. It's a very peaceful way of thinking. It's a very traditional way of thinking, especially in Africa. Before European colonization, most of Africa is animist or shaman to some extent. Ethiopia eventually becomes Christian, which is unlike a lot of countries on this part of Africa. Ethiopia is surrounded by countries that do not follow Christianity as a major religion, countries like Sudan or Somalia or Eritrea. Eritrea does have a significant amount of Christians, but Eritrea and Ethiopia were also one nation, like combined until 1991, so that might explain that. But countries that they border, like Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, and Djibouti, they all are predominantly Muslim. So Ethiopia is completely surrounded in Muslim countries. And also parts of Ethiopia are completely surrounded with these humongous mountains. So we can see the similarities already with Zimbabwe a little with geography. So as I said before, Aksum was a Christian empire, Orthodox Christian. And as I said before, all empires come to an end. A lot of empires just like very quickly go from this empire to the next empire. Empires like, what am I going to say? The Byzantine Empire. You woke up one day in the Byzantine Empire and then you went to bed, you woke up the next day and you were already in the Ottoman Empire. But Ethiopia wasn't like that. Ethiopia was, when Aksum fell, it didn't go straight into the Ethiopian Empire. It took a few hundred years for it to happen. Ethiopian Empire was not a really major empire at this time, but I still think it's really important to go over just so we can compare it to the other 2/3 empires kind of went over today. So as I mentioned before, they were Orthodox Christian. They used a language called Ge'ez as their sacred language. So Ge'ez is no longer spoken. It's used in Orthodox church ceremonies. It's not spoken every day, but holy books are written in it. Religious texts are written in it. But Ge'ez eventually died off almost around the same time as Aksum died. But from Ge'ez, once that died, two major languages came forward. And one of them is called Amharic, which is now the national language of Ethiopia. And the other language is called Tigrinya. And Tigrinya is also spoken in Ethiopia, but it's the national language of this country that I have my cursor over right now, and that's called Eritrea. So you actually go to those two countries today, and you can see a lot of similarities in their text. They have a very specific, like, beautiful-looking text that you don't see anywhere else in the world, and it all comes from Ge'ez. And I believe in one of the photos I'll show you, it'll have some Ge'ez in there. This is just a picture that's supposed to represent Ethiopian Christians. What I'm circling around right now, that is written Ge'ez. I know it's a little small, you probably can't see it. We're looking at a ceremony of someone washing someone else's feet. Cleanliness, holiness, it's something that we see a lot in Christianity. My next photo, we're going to go over this briefly. So this is Yekuno Amlak. You also see some Amharic here in the upper right-hand corner. Yekuno Amlak was initially, he was the prince. He was just a regular old prince. He didn't have a major role. But then as the Ethiopian Empire came to be, he became the emperor of Ethiopia. And he was the first emperor in this new dynasty. So when we think of dynasties, I think we mainly like to focus on China, like the Shang, the Zhao, and the Qin, and the Han, that kind of stuff. But the Ethiopian Empire also had many, many, many dynasties. You can look it up. They had dynasty after dynasty after dynasty. So Yekuno Amlak was the first emperor of the Solomonic Dynasty. So when you hear the word Solomonic, I think of Solomon. Solomon is in the Bible. He's also in the Old and the New Testament. Solomonic Dynasty was basically showing how people gained power. Like with England, we have this monarchy where people under one family get power. Well, in the Solomonic Dynasty, people were allowed to be emperor if they had descended from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. So because Emperor Yekuno Amlak, he believed he was the first emperor of Ethiopia, as in the Ethiopian Empire. He was the direct descendant. He believed he was the direct descendant of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. If you have any questions, feel free. I feel like I'm just like running. I'm going through this material really quickly. I might be talking really quickly. If you have any questions about anything, feel free to ask all you want. I feel like I'm going really, really quickly, and I don't want to rush it, especially if anyone's not understanding what I'm going through. Checking the poll right now, and everyone's excited to learn about all of them. So I think I'm going to move on to the next empire. Are the Hausa kingdoms. And the Hausa kingdoms, I think we're going to spend a little bit more time on, because the Hausa kingdoms are very different than the other two we went over. So unlike Zimbabwe or Ethiopia, nowadays you can get a plane ticket to Zimbabwe or Ethiopia, go to their capital cities, but you can't go to Hausa, because Hausa isn't a nation. Hausa describes a group of people that are called the Hausa people. And they live in Africa, Western Africa, the border of Nigeria and Niger. They lived in this one area. They weren't like the people of Zimbabwe or Ethiopia. Zimbabwe and Ethiopia are mainly one culture also. The people of Zimbabwe are mainly Shona people. There are also other people of other tribes, other ethnicities in Zimbabwe, but Zimbabwe is mainly Shona. And Ethiopia also has people that are Tigrinya, but it's also mainly Ethiopians. Whereas Nigeria nowadays has hundreds of thousands of ethnic groups, as do Ethiopia and Zimbabwe, but they're a little bit more diffused in means of culture and language especially. The people of the Hausa kingdoms were also unified under one language. People of the Hausa kingdoms, they didn't speak a lot of different other languages like the people of Zimbabwe or Ethiopia did. As I mentioned before with Ethiopia, people there spoke Tigrinya and they spoke Amharic, even though they were related. They were two different languages. And the people of Zimbabwe, even though most of them spoke Shona, There's a lot of other languages, especially with the border with South Africa. South Africa is like a language paradise. It has a lot of languages, a lot of cultural diversity in general. The people of the Hausa kingdom all spoke Hausa, so they were able to interact with each other, talk with one another under one tongue, and it made things probably a lot easier for the Hausa kingdom than it did for places like Ethiopia and Zimbabwe. Trade is also very important, as it is for basically every single kingdom that you'll study, especially at this time period before European interaction. So I'll be going over the Trans-Saharan / the Sand Roads. So this is just a recap if anyone was here last week. The Trans-Saharan Sand Roads, they went through this part of Africa. So I'm circling a desert right now. This is a very arid part of Africa. It's in northern Africa. I want you guys in the chat to identify what this desert is, because it's a really important desert in world history, especially. We go over it a lot in this time period mainly, but we'll also go over it eventually when we go to things like the Algerian independence from France. This desert goes through a lot in world history, and it's a desert we're going to go over quite a bit when we go over African history. So what is the name of this desert? I want you guys to answer in the chat. Take a few minutes. It doesn't need to be like a whole rushing thing. Take your time. Yeah, so it's the Sahara, and that might sound like a really straightforward kind of basic question, but it's something I want to make sure that everyone completely understands. That's something that people understand, because it's really important when we go over the Trans-Saharan Sand Roads. Kind of also gave you the answer with the whole Trans-Saharan thing, but hopefully no one noticed that. I should have thought that a little better. But the Trans-Saharan roads were unlike other roads. The other two roads that we focus a lot on in world history are the Silk Roads, which are, I think, the most, like, not common, but they're the most talked about road. We talk about the Silk Roads a lot. Those are through Europe and Asia, Eurasia. We went over the Indian Ocean trade very briefly at the beginning. It doesn't really come into play too much with the Hausa kingdoms, just because Nigeria is on the completely opposite side. Nigeria does not have a border with the Indian Ocean at all. So it's a little too expansive for people to go from Nigeria to the Swahili city-states, which are in modern-day Kenya and Tanzania, if you see those on the map. So the Trans-Saharan roads were literally roads through the desert. People would walk across and across and across and across the desert. And you might be asking, why were people going through the desert? Like, the desert is so dry, there's no resources there. But in reality, there's one thing that the desert really has, and it's gold. Gold is a major commodity at this time. Gold is so expensive. And these Trans-Saharan roads focus a lot on luxury goods, things like gold and oil and diamonds. Like, there's a lot of expensive stuff being traded on these roads. So traders would go along the desert. They would go from places like Chad to Niger to Mali, even all the way down to Nigeria. And they would trade things to little villages. So you might be asking, what's the cultural impact of the Trans-Saharan roads? Because it seems like people are just like trading things for their own benefit, but how is that impacting the world historically? Well, there's people along these lines called griots, and griots were these singing, usually men, who would sing stories about their religion, about Africa in general, their cultures, and they go around and they were almost like missionaries. Like, they were singing, but they were like preaching their word, and they were going along Africa, and they were influencing their religion and introducing them to different religions and cultures. People also use the Trans-Saharan / Sand Roads as a way to spread Islam. So Islam was nowadays is heavily practiced in these countries that are in the Sahara Desert, But before, as I said before, there was more of a focus on shamanism and animism. But with people traveling along here, people that followed Islam going from village to village to village, preaching the word, Islam becomes a lot more heavily practiced. And as people start trading, let's say the Hausa people were Muslim, in fact, they're going to go spread it to other nations. Like they're going to go here to this country. This country is called Cameroon. And they're going to be like, hey, we have a new religion and it's telling us this, this, and that if we do this, we'll be okay. And if we do this, we'll be happy. And then they'll spread it to this country, which is Central African Republic. And then they'll spread it throughout Africa. Africa has a lot of nations that are Muslim majority. So that's something you definitely want to look into. You might be asking, this Sahara Desert is so expansive. So how did people rest in between? Because deserts get cold at night, if you don't know. Deserts are excruciatingly hot in the day. And at night they're cold, but there's also deadly snakes and scorpions. So how did people rest? They couldn't just lay on the sand in between their travels. Well, there were these buildings called Caravanserai. And Caravanserai are almost like modern past motels. They're almost like what motels are today. They're like, we're going to provide you with a meal, maybe some water, a place to stay for the night before you have to leave the next morning on your camel and go to your next village. So caravanserai are very important. They basically save people's lives from being killed by wild animals, and they help people stay alive so they can trade goods across Africa, so they can spread religion across Africa. So caravanserai were very important in African history. So that was a little bit of an intro. I'll be doing a little bit more Hausa specific content in a few minutes, but I want to make sure that I completely address all this information from last week's stream, because I think everyone that's watching didn't watch that, which is completely okay. I just want to make sure that everyone is on the same page and knows the same amount of information before I go into the new content. Another thing to note is when we think of slavery, we mainly think of Europeans selling Africans. But in reality, this is way before any type of European interaction. And there was still slavery. There were people that would sell other people in Africa as a way to pay off their debts. Just they would conquer villages and other kingdoms and take people as prisoner. So there also was major slavery, major slave routes, exporting slaves across the Sahara Desert throughout Africa. So there's also heavy, major prevalence of slavery in Africa during this time, which is something I wanted to address because I feel like with AP World History, we mainly talk about European slavery, but slavery happened before the Europeans too. So that's just something I wanted to address. Oh, that was a mistake. I'm so sorry. I thought there was a picture. So Islam, as I mentioned before, Islam was spread throughout Africa, but in reality, Niger is pretty south compared to the Sahara Desert. Like it touches some of the Sahara Desert, but it's very southern. It's almost an extreme. So but Islam made it to Mali much before Nigeria. And Mali's on this map. Mali's here. And Songhai, which is also part of modern-day Mali, modern-day Niger. They were Muslim. They had been converted. There's still a lot of people in both those countries that follow traditional African religions, but Islam does play a heavy influence in these countries modern day, and most people are, in fact, Muslim. So people from Mali and Niger, people trading across these routes, people going to interact with people from other places. They go into northern Nigeria, aka now how we're going to refer to as the Hausa kingdoms, and they convert them to Islam. So Islam is major. It's something that Islam is unlike any of the other two empires that we went over. Zimbabwe at this time is traditional religions, Ethiopia is Christian, and then Hausa is Muslim. So they're all very different in terms of religion. So I want you to keep that in mind because, as I said before, we're doing review questions later in this stream, and that's just something you might want to keep in mind. As I said, all empires must come to an end. The Hausa kingdoms also didn't have a very quick downfall. Like they weren't, as I said before, I used this comparison, but the Byzantine Empire, you went to sleep in the Byzantine Empire and you woke up as an Ottoman citizen. They weren't like that. The Hausa kingdoms had a lot of issues. They had a lot of internal and external war. So what I mean by internal war is Hausa people, different clans of Hausa people were fighting between one another. Different clans with different opinions, different leaders, the same religion, same language. They were unified by that, but they were completely different in ideas and opinions, and that led to a lot of war. And war is usually never good. War leads to a lot of instability. Internal war can really just break a country apart because you're fighting against your own people. And external war occurred as well, but it wasn't as detrimental as the internal war. So Niger, the Hausa kingdoms were fighting with other kingdoms like Mali and Sangay, which were also much more powerful than the Hausa kingdoms. The Hausa kingdoms aren't mentioned as much in AP World History as those other two empires because they weren't as strong as those other two empires. They weren't very strong military-wise. They didn't really fight a lot except for those couple of external wars that they fought. They aren't known for being these extra strong, amazing conquerors who take all the land and beat all their enemies like the Mongols are. They're more like a relaxed, like we're here, we're not going to cause any issues with people unless they cause issues with us. And that's really what led to their downfall. And when issues came up, they didn't know how to deal with it. And it just led to their downfall. Another reason why the empire declined were the rise of caliphates. So caliphates are like kingdoms in a sense. So caliphates are based off of Islam. They're epicenters of Islam. They're little kingdoms almost under the rule of a Muslim caliph. And there were a lot of caliphates in Western Africa, mainly, modern day Mali. Mali had a lot of empires at this time. They had hundreds and hundreds of empires. They also had like a major city called Timbuktu, which I went over in my last stream a little bit. But Mali was just very powerful. They had a lot of external war because of all those empires and that squished in that one little country. Anyway, Islam had a lot of influence, not just in Africa. They had a lot of influence in Spain. To this day, if you go to places in southern Spain, Spain does not speak Arabic, but you can see a few mosques. You can see places with original tile work done in Arabic because southern cities in Spain were capitals of caliphates, epicenters of Islam. They were very strong military-wise, and they converted other people around this area. So yeah, they're really important. They're very strong caliphates. So caliphates were in Western Africa, and they wanted to expand. Most empires want to expand. They want to expand to get more people, to get more resources, things like rivers, which places like Ethiopia did not have many rivers. I believe they just graze the Nile, but they don't really have a lot of rivers. So if Ethiopia was smart and they chose to expand, which they didn't because of all the mountain ranges like Zimbabwe, and they decided to, let's go and get this lake. Let's go and expand all here to get Lake Victoria. So we have a very large water source. We get resources, and hopefully there's some gold there and there's a lot of people. So that was the idea of Western African caliphates. They wanted to expand so they can get more people. They could convert more people to Islam, and they could just get a lot more resources. As I said, Syria has so much gold. So that's what people were selling at the time. So empires in Mali, expanded into Nigeria and attempted to take the Hausa kingdoms, and this led to war. Hausa kingdoms were like, we're not going to let this happen, but eventually the Hausa kingdoms were just so beat up from internal war. They also weren't like the strongest empire ever, so they eventually declined, and the Hausa empires ended, and it became part of a Western African caliphate. So I have one more slide, but they're review questions. So before I get into review questions, I was going to ask if anyone had any other questions, any questions that you want to ask about something that you learned today, something that you may be confused about. Just feel free to leave them in the chat. I'll probably give around 2 minutes. So I'm around the 45-minute mark now. Have the questions in by 47 minutes, and then if there are some, I'll answer them, and if there are not any questions by the 47, 46 and a half-ish minute mark, I'm going to continue to the questions, the review questions. 1 minute, 2 minutes, starting now. Okay, so I'm going to cut it a little short. It seems like there's no type of questions, and I really don't want to bore anyone that's watching this. So I think I'm just going to go straight to the questions. There's 2 of them. They're more like SAQ style questions. They're not meant to be like 3 paragraphs or longer, but they're meant to be around 3 to 6 sentences. So these are questions that I want you guys to answer in the chat. We're gonna go one at a time because there's 2 questions, and the first one is a lot more complex than the second one. The first one may be around 6 sentences, 5 sentences. So I'm gonna go to the next slide, and I want you guys to answer the first review question. And this is mainly concerning Great Zimbabwe, Ethiopia, and a little bit of the Swahili states. I didn't go into too much depth about it, but it's not, you don't need to know a lot of content about the Swahili city-states for this question. So I'm going to just do the first question. I'm going to read it out loud. Between the years 1200 and 1450 CE, how did geography affect the growth of landlocked African civilizations like Great Zimbabwe and Ethiopia? How does that compare to that of non-landlocked civilizations like the Swahili city-states? So I want you to answer that in the chat. But before, I'm just going to explain the question a little bit because I think it might be a little oddly worded, and I'm sorry for that. I'm just going to go into a little bit of depth about what I actually mean. So my slide, the first thing I mentioned on all my slides was geography. I went over how mountains, rivers, ocean borders affected the nations, the empires, and if how they expanded, if they did border an ocean, how they expanded, if they didn't, if they even did expand. So my question's asking, if geography, how did it, if it did, how did geography affect how empires that were landlocked, the 3 landlocked ones that we went over, like Great Zimbabwe and Ethiopia, how did being landlocked affect their growth? And how is that different from how places like the Swahili city-states grew? Because the Swahili city-states have an ocean border. So I want you to compare, maybe a little bit of contrast, how these countries' specific geographies affected their growth, similarities and differences. I'm going to give a lot of time for this because it's a kind of wordy, very in-depth question to go over and to type, and my typing skills are not good, so I know I'd take a little bit longer. So I'm going to give you guys until 51. But if you still don't understand this question, it's completely fine. Just leave me a message in the chat and I'll feel free to go over it again. You can start now. I'll be back at 51 minutes to go over the first question before we go to the next question. Okay, so it's been about 2 minutes. I see that no one's answered it in the chat, so I'll give until like 53. I know it's a really complex question. It's also 2 questions, and it asks about 3 different places, so I know it's complex, and it'll definitely take a little bit more time. So I'll give you until the 53-minute mark to go over the answer and how to approach this type of question if you get a question like this on the AP exam. Okay, so does everyone need more time to answer this question, or do you want to move on to the next question, or did you write your answer? You're just a little slower when it comes to typing. I just want to know, so I know whether you guys want to move on to the next question, or I want to know if you guys are still typing, because I can't really see if you guys are typing currently. So I want to know if everyone's still working, or if, people don't know how to use the chat or something. I can completely help with that if that's just the issue. People don't know how to use the chat because it's a little difficult your first time. I understand that, especially if this is your first time using the chat in one of our Fiveable streams. So I just want to have like a thumbs up, I'm still working, or like, can we move to the next question? I think the next question is going to help me a lot more. Just let me know in the chat, unless you guys are typing currently. And if you are, please try to get done. Like, I'm not trying to rush you, but I want to get to the next question and still have some time for some more questions if you guys have any. Okay, so I think I'm going to move on to the next question. I'm going to answer it right now. So if you didn't have the time to write it in the box, I'm sorry, but I just want to be able to move on to the next question because there's 2 of them here, and I want to still have time for answering questions afterward. So the question is, between the years 1200 and 1450 CE, how did geography affect the growth of landlocked African civilizations like Great Zimbabwe and Ethiopia? So let's start with that question. As it's mentioned in the question, Great Zimbabwe and Ethiopia are landlocked. I'll go into a little bit more depth about Great Zimbabwe right now. Great Zimbabwe was also completely surrounded by a bunch of rocks. If you guys ever take AP art history, it's called a henge, or it might be called a megalith. It's completely surrounded by henges and megaliths. So because it's completely surrounded, people didn't really interact with other places, and especially because Ethiopia and Zimbabwe are surrounded by mountains as well. People didn't really have the opportunity to get out of the mountains. Like, yes, they did interact with other empires, mainly Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe did interact with people involved in Indian Ocean trade, but it wasn't their main priority. Their main priority was staying safe from invaders and defense. It was their main goal was to just stay defended at all times and keep themselves safe. So geography limited the growth of landlocked African civilizations because mountains made it hard for people to go to other places. So how does that compare to that of non-landlocked civilizations like the Swahili city-states? The Swahili city-states were completely surrounded by water. If you don't know, the Swahili city-states are in like modern Tanzania, modern-day Kenya. Because they were by the ocean, they had the ability to use boats to expand. Now, the Swahili city-states didn't really expand to be very large like other empires, but they did gain control of Zanzibar. And this doesn't show Zanzibar, but Zanzibar would be right about here. It's an island, and very culturally diverse island with a lot of Indian people, Chinese people, African people because of the Swahili city-states and Indian Ocean trade. So they were able to get Zanzibar because they were, first of all, they had an ocean border. They weren't completely landlocked, and they could use boats and different types of maritime technology to get to places. So yeah, in a nutshell, geography placed things like mountains, a lack of rivers really limited the growth of landlocked civilizations, but oceans and water really made other civilizations prosper. That was the answer I was looking for this question. If you had any other answers that you thought of, you can definitely put those in a chat and I'll go over it. Like, there's many correct answers to any SAQ. Like, there's a general, like 2 or 3 that most people will think of, but there's always a few very interesting answers that are still very valid and historically accurate. So if you have any answers like that, feel free to leave them in the chat. So the next question is, evaluate the significance of religion in Ethiopia and the Hausa kingdoms between 1200 and 1450 CE. So I'm going to give you guys until the 60-minute mark, the 1 hour mark, to answer this question. If I don't get answers by then, I'll probably just review this question again, like I did with the last one, and then I'll go into like a question answer kind of thing. You guys can ask me all the questions you want. and then I think we can end the stream. So I'm going to give you about a minute because it's a much shorter question. So the minute starts now. I'll tell you guys when the time's up to submit your answers, and then I'll go over it with you guys. Oh, if you guys are wondering what I'm doing, I'm actually have notes about like the answers to these questions. I'm answering them as you're answering them. So I'm just trying to. I was an AP World History student last year, so I'm answering these as if I was an AP World History student. What I would write if I got these as an SAQ, one of those SAQs where they just give you a question where you don't have something like a data or type of chart. I'm doing these as SAQs if they were, how do you say this? If they were handed to me and had no background information. I'm answering them as if I was an AP World History student, which I was last year. So that was about the 1 minute mark, but it seems like no one answered the question. And I don't know whether it's because people have this tab open on their computer, but they're not really watching, or if it's because the question is difficult. So I'm going to just assume that the question is difficult, and I'm going to go over it now. So, so the question asks for you to evaluate the significance of religion in Ethiopia and the Hausa kingdoms. So I'm going to go over Ethiopia first because it was first in the question. So Ethiopia at this time was mainly Christian, Orthodox Christian. Religion played a big role in Ethiopia. The leaders of Ethiopia literally thought that they descended from figures in the Old Testament, in the New Testament. So religion played a big role. Ethiopia was also at some point part of an empire called Aksum. Aksum was Catholic, Orthodox Christian. That was their state religion. They had a specific language that used to be spoken, but was now, after it died out a little, it was reserved just for church and religious books. So that's definitely shows the significance of religion in Ethiopia, I think. So next are the Hausa kingdoms. Hausa kingdoms were Muslim. Hausa kingdoms are a little bit different because they were converted to Islam. Hausa kingdoms, Islam was also very important, as Islam was in a lot of countries at the time by this general area because of the Trans-Saharan Roads. That's just a little general answer about what's I'm going over. Just those are two very general questions about what we went over in the previous slides. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask any questions now. This is the end of all my slides. So I'm going to give you until like 1:04 to type in any questions. If you don't have any questions, I'm going to officially end the stream. Just goodbye. Thank you to all the people that watched this, by the way. I'm going to see if anyone asks any questions. It seems like there's only one person really left here. So if Genevieve, if you have any questions, feel free. If you don't have any questions, it seems like we have no people left who are live currently. So I think I'm going to end the stream. Thank you so much for all the people that watched this stream. I really enjoyed teaching you guys about Africa, especially in a time that we don't study as much, because AP World goes over a little bit more of like European Africa, whereas this presentation was completely about Africa, but in the Middle Ages. So that's definitely something I wanted to address, something I wanted to go over, because right after this time period, we have Europeans coming to Africa, and it completely changes the whole dynamic and the whole culture of Africa. So this is probably my last presentation on Africa. for a while. So thank you guys so much for watching this. I hope you learned something about Africa, especially in this time period. And I hope you guys stay for more of my streams later on throughout the year. I'll be here all year as a Fiveable student streamer. Thank you so much. And I hope all of you guys had a lot of fun watching me today. So thank you so much.